Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Good morning. I'm Nicole Pysh, and I will be joined by my co-presenter, Pam Duncan. It's a pleasure to be here today. We are going to share our learnings as project co-chairs on the Alberta Water Council project, improving drought resilience in Alberta through a simulation. In this presentation, we're going to cover the project background. We'll talk about the simulation exercise that was held last summer, and we'll present the key findings and next steps to be taken to wrap up the project. So to start, what led to the simulation exercise that was held this past summer? Almost 3 years ago, an Alberta Water Council project team was struck with the purpose of using an appropriately scoped and scaled drought simulation exercise to assist various groups, the Government of Alberta, irrigation districts, municipalities, First Nations, industry, to assist these groups in understanding and planning for drought preparation and response. The project team procured the expertise of a consultant, WaterSmart, to first conduct a literature review of approaches to drought management and simulation exercise in neighboring jurisdictions, and second, to plan, execute, and evaluate a drought simulation exercise. This project built on the work of other Alberta Water Council project teams, like the Drought Resiliency Project. That information and more is available on the Alberta Water Council website. Address on the slide. So what do we know about drought in Alberta? Multi-year droughts have been recurrent events throughout the province's history, and we know that the chances of multi-year droughts are increasing, as are their intensity, severity, and area. Actually, experts say that we should expect variability and fast switches from droughts to significant rainfall, which is what we observed last summer. The impacts of drought on the environment, economy, and society are significant and cumulative. In 2001-2002, that drought was one of the most significant droughts in recent memory and had multi-sector impacts to agriculture, to water supplies, recreation, tourism, health, etc., which is likely to occur with multi-year droughts. In 2001 and 2002, across Canada, agricultural production dropped by 3.6 billion. Gross domestic product dropped by 5.8 billion, and employment losses exceeded 41,000 jobs. Specific to Alberta, crop insurance payments were 274 million in 2001 and increased over threefold to 790 million in 2002. And there was zero net farm income in 2002. So why a drought simulation? It's difficult to prepare for drought due to the complexity of management efforts and collaboration needed before a drought occurs. Unlike other hazards that come on quickly, drought tends to evolve slowly, and its beginning and end can be unclear. Therefore, planning tends to be neglected, and I'll point to the hydrological cycle on the right hand of the screen. One way to overcome this barrier is to engage diverse actors and decision makers in thinking about and planning for drought. The review of historical drought simulation exercises showed us that they can be an effective way to increase drought awareness and preparation when a drought isn't currently being experienced. A simulation exercise provides an opportunity to work through one or multiple scenarios that closely mimic real-life acute and chronic drought events and can be a powerful tool to test management and communication strategies. The purpose of the exercise was to use Alberta Environment and Protected Areas water shortage procedures for the South Saskatchewan River Basin as the basis to test the drought response process amongst water managers and stakeholders through 5 stages of drought. The objectives of the exercise were to assess current drought vulnerabilities within the watershed, identify gaps in current drought mitigation actions, legislation, and policy, identify procedures and mitigations to address current gaps, and identify lines of communication between stakeholders. Ultimately, one of the goals of this exercise is to inform the development of an Alberta Environment and Protected Areas Drought and Water Shortage Plan, which is required under the Alberta Emergency Plan. The new Drought and Water Shortage Plan will describe the measures taken in drought prevention and mitigation, and it will also describe how Environment and Protected Areas works with key stakeholders like Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation, like the Alberta Energy Regulator, to prepare for, respond to, and recover from drought events. Another one of the outcomes of this simulation exercise will be recommendations from the project team to the Alberta Water Council to improve the overall drought management system. So how did the exercise play out? Let's start with who attended the exercise. Several of you are in the room today. I see you. The exercise was held on June 10th, 2020 in Calgary, with 40 participants and observers from 18 different organizations, including many groups from the agricultural sector, as highlighted on the slide. One of the key decision points in the development of the exercise was choosing the location for the scenario, the simulation type, and a model. The geographic focus chosen was the South Saskatchewan River Basin, based on the area having the most history with drought. A number of different simulation options and modeling tools were explored in the literature review. A serious game-style exercise was selected, and the South Saskatchewan River Operational Model, SROM, was chosen because of its relevance to the area and its robust nature. Previous work in the basin was completed with specific sub-basin models. So we already had the Red Deer River Operational Model, the Bow River Operational Model, and the Oldman and South Saskatchewan River Basins Model. The SROM model combines all three sub-basin models and is built on the OASIS platform. Significant irrigation involvement in the development of these models continues through a current AIDA project to identify and assess strategic water management in the South Saskatchewan River Basin using the SROM model. The kickoff meeting was just yesterday, and you'll hear more about that from Kim Sturgis this afternoon. The scenario chosen for the exercise was a 2-year drought designed to stress the system to meet all 5 drought stages. The 2-year scenario used in the exercise was hypothetical, but realistic for the basin because it was based on measurements taken from 1977 and 2001. On the day of the exercise, each participant was assigned to one of 3 WPACs, Watershed Planning and Advisory Councils. So the Red Deer River Basin, the Bow River Basin, and the Oldman SSRB Basin. While participants assumed the role of a member of a WPAC, each participant offered their valuable insight from their own perspective. For example, the irrigation districts provided valuable insight based on their historic initiative in responsible stewardship of their water licenses, the AIDA Human Use Declaration committing to protection of essential water use, and ongoing participation in planning. Performance measures were used throughout to help participants understand the impacts of water management decisions on various parts of the system. And another aspect of the exercise that was equally important was the direction received from the Alberta Environment and Protected Areas Minister and the Intra-Water Basin Coordinating Committee Chair, roles that were played in the exercise by WaterSmart. So I just wanted to quickly touch on the stages of drought that were used in the exercise. So as mentioned, these were modified from the Environment and Protected Areas water shortage procedures for the South Saskatchewan River Basin for the purposes of this exercise. So at stage 1, water levels are trending or generally persisting at levels that are at or below lower statistical quartiles, and water availability trend is a concern. At stage 2, flows and water levels are generally persisting at lower statistical deciles. At stage 3, we start to get concerned that apportionment agreements may not be met, and licensees may wish to enforce their license priority. At stage 4, large-scale drought poses a risk to the majority of water users. A significant number of water users are unable to divert water, and drought persists or is projected to persist. Finally, at stage 5, there's an elevated risk to human health and safety due to insufficient water supply or water quality degradation. And there's also stress to the aquatic environment to a point where fish mortality occurs. So the simulation scenario progressed through the cycle shown here, starting in March of 2035 and ending in August of 2036. So we went through 2 complete cycles. At the beginning of each time step, so at the beginning of each month, participants reviewed the information and performance measures available to support their decision making. And you'll note that the information available varied throughout the year. Information was provided where applicable, such as snowpack status, groundwater status, precipitation reports, and water supply outlook forecasts. Information from the model's performance measures were displayed for participants, which included basin storage, environmental flows, water shortages, and apportionment. So after receiving the information, WPACs were asked to decide on the stage of drought and how they were going to respond. Where mitigating actions were identified, changes to water demand, like municipal demand, irrigation demand, industry demand, and temporary demands, were then incorporated into the model so that participants could understand the impacts of their water management decisions on various parts of the system. Then it started all over again with the next months, where participants considered the information available, decided on the drought stage and response, implemented actions in the model, and then moved to the next decision point. For example, in the Oldman Sub-Basin, early weather forecasts did not yield as much rain. As reservoirs came down and diverged further from averages, participants looked into water sharing agreements as a mitigating action. This was reflected in the model through reductions in water demand from large license holders in the basin. And now I'm going to pass it over to Pam Duncan.
Thanks, Nicole. So we're doing a little tag team here, as you can see. So, as a follow-up from the exercise, the project team has put together 6 key findings that we'll step through now. Okay. So let's start with the first key finding that really permeates through the rest, the importance of local communication. Participants identified an opportunity for more frequent communication between water managers and water users at the local scale, even in the early stages of the drought. Frequent communication helps water users encourage voluntary reduction of water demand and rationalize mandatory actions when necessary. A few other observations from the exercise include participants consulted guidance documents and available situational information, but in fact, good ideas also came from the discussions between participants themselves. Communication between water managers provides valuable learning opportunities for knowledge transfer, sharing best practices, and building vital networks with other decision makers. Local managers are most knowledgeable on the interrelatedness of infrastructure built by the GOA and irrigation districts. Next, we discovered that water license assignments, and you heard a bit about some of this from Tim, actually, in his presentation about 2020, but in the exercise too, they were key mitigation tools for all basins. Water license assignments, or descriptively known as water sharing agreements, are permitted under the Water Act, and this is a voluntary approach that encourages those closest to the water use to play a more active role in managing a water shortage. Large senior water license holders reassigned a portion of their licenses under written agreement with others within the basin, recognizing that there was an increasing probability of a call on priority. During the exercise, the Oldman River Sub-Basin relied heavily on water license agreements, which were proposed based on historic precedent set during the 2001-2002 drought. Agreements emerged spontaneously in the Red Deer Sub-Basins as a common sense approach. Despite the use of the water sharing agreements in the exercise and willingness from parties to reduce their water consumption, Participants agreed that guidance on the process, including development of agreements in compliance with the Water Act, would be valuable to ensure that all parties entering an agreement are on the same page, since there was some ambiguity surrounding the scope and role of government, expectations of water users and water managers. The simulation participants also cautioned that it was actually a very time-consuming process, and this perhaps was not reflected in the exercise, but to start early on these, even in the winter season or earlier, which is why the next finding is so important. So this is accurate forecasting and good data, and these were critical limitations for irrigation districts participating in the exercise and other water managers during the simulation. Participants identified the need for more frequent monitoring of water sources, including groundwater, snowpack, and surface water, and good data in the areas of water quality, quantity, and use. These are essential to decision-making by particularly irrigation districts, as setting either annual farm gate water allocations or other water supply rationing needed to be timed to crop seeding and other field management decisions. Being able to effectively understand and interpret data was also noted as key to informed decision-making. So our next key finding was the need for robust communication and a good understanding of apportionment, another thing we're starting to hear a bit more about today. So meeting apportionment is our joint responsibility, which was shared between the SSRB subbasins in the exercise. However, during that drought simulation, when the Old Man and Red Deer subbasins indicated their inability to meet their apportionment obligations, interbasin communication was key, since the Bow River subbasin agreed to make up the difference in this particular scenario. As irrigation districts have a strong history of working together, they also have the potential to ensure that communication and messaging on aspects of apportionment are reflected in drought management planning and response. All participants noted they benefited during the exercise by gaining a better understanding and background and definition of apportionment. Another key learning encompassed the GOA's 5 drought stages as a common language and framework for gauging the severity of a drought event and the actions taken. The exercise followed an adapted version of the stages that was outlined in the earlier slides, and by the end of the exercise, as you heard, all subbasins reached the most severe drought, stage 5. While participants found the drought stages useful for defining and communicating the severity of drought, it was recognized that the availability of timely supports, communication, messaging, and response requires a clear delineation and contextualization of and between these stages. Having an alignment between government and local area managers and understanding of these stages is key to help in planning. It allows everyone to be on the same page and have the right timing of appropriate mitigation. And so, as we heard from Nicole earlier, the GOA is actively working towards updating and publishing revised drought stages in a drought and water shortage plan. And the final key finding highlighted dam and reservoir operations. The exercise modeled normal dam operations and outcomes associated with in-stream objectives, water conservation objectives, recreational use, hydropower generation, and water supply downstream. However, as drought severity increased in certain areas, it was recognized that dam and reservoir operating rules may need to be rebalanced based on the area's priorities. The exercise participants discussed whether operations could be modified during severe drought. But in the meantime, constant communication between operators and downstream users continues to be needed to understand any limitations and improvement to efficiencies of water supply. So having run that exercise last summer and recapped these 6 key learnings, what's next for the project? So based on the exercise findings, the project team has drafted accompanying recommendations addressing those 6 themes. These recommendations, they are in draft, and they will be included in the team's draft final report, and that is currently going through the Alberta Water Council key sector review process at this time. Once that's complete, the report will then go through additional review by the AWC board. There will be a broader sector review with a final report tentatively scheduled for release later this summer. The release will also include communication materials such as a fact sheet, presentation template, and a webinar that various sectors can use with their members. And I think that wraps up our presentation. So just a quick few thanks. Alberta Innovates as a major funder of this project, the AIDA and Margot for their ongoing support, the EID and the SMRID for participating in the exercise. Many of you are here today. And WaterSmart for their work on the literature review and the planning, execution, and facilitation of the drought simulation. And just a quick shout out to the project team that Nicole and I worked with, and all came together with the Alberta Water Council, so a great group of folks guiding this project. And then just a thank you to you all. The website has a wealth of information on this project and other Alberta drought-related material, that earlier project as well. Building resiliency to multi-year drought is up there, so I encourage you to go check out that information on the website, and we have a few moments for questions.
Just one quick question. You pretty well described what's going on in Colorado right now. Is our river system over-allocated like the Colorado is?
How do you want it?
I can't answer that question.
Well, I mean, there is a moratorium. There are no more new licenses issued. So I think that we're doing the best with the water that we have now, and doing exercises like this allows us to sort of see how we can best efficiently manage that water.
No, no. Okay.
Well, I may follow up with that question because over-allocation is a matter of perspective, I think. I participated in that simulation workshop, and I was glad for the opportunity, but I'm concerned about how the aquatic environment was dealt with and in-stream flows. It seemed that there is inadequate consideration of that, not only in a drought situation, but over the longer term. I mean, we've been told our rivers are in a state of degradation or declining health, and we've got some indicators, but there's very little monitoring. So I'd like to get your impression on how we might improve that, our information, our monitoring, and our decision-making around aquatic ecosystem health.
Sure. I want me to.
Yeah, go ahead. Go.
So during the exercise, conformance to in-stream objectives and water conservation objectives for the protection of aquatic health were one of the performance measures that were continually looked at. In real life, outside of exercise, Alberta Environment and Protected Areas meets regularly over the summer, weekly, to exchange information on the current status. So our hydrologists are continually looking at flows on the Alberta River Basin's website, another plug for that, to evaluate conformance to those in-stream objectives. And our water management infrastructure is also operated to maintain those in-stream objectives or water conservation objectives.
Just a follow-up question, if I may. The data on water conservation objectives that I've seen multi-year shows they're not being met most years during the irrigation season. And most large licenses are not conditional on meeting water conservation objectives. So in terms of that question about over-allocation, I firmly believe we are over-allocated if river health is a concern.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not, not totally sure about conformance broadly. Managing drought is a very challenging situation. There are multiple outcomes that we are trying to meet. Aquatic health, all the demands on our river systems. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you for the nice presentation. It was a very good description of the modeling process, I guess. I believe it's good for all the policymakers here. But I'm kind of like technically oriented, so I have got quite a few questions here. On the first slide, you are showing like hydro-illogical model. Just wondering if there is a threshold value when you call it illogical, because we are just habituated in the logical. This is one of the question. And when it is a water shortage, like how do you determine what is the like threshold? When you call that this is short, drought, then stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. I believe you have got those, but I did not see in the slide.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, what was your first question about the hydrological model? It was just a joke. As far as drought and water shortage, so drought is a period of time with low precipitation and may cause water shortages. But water shortages can also occur during periods outside of drought due to infrastructure failures, for instance, like we just heard from Tim Romanov on the Milk River with the failure of the St. Mary drop structure. So drought can lead to water shortage, but water shortages can also occur at other times outside of drought conditions. I hope that answered your question.
So that's why I think we had different sub-basins. There were some different considerations, the discussions at the table in terms of where those thresholds would be depended on what was happening locally. So those 5 stages that the GOA provided for us to sort of build the simulation around were helpful to contextualize that. So you, that's sort of that when I was talking about the importance of that local scale of drought is to be looking for that guidance, but also knowing locally where those triggers are for that region.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. One of the things with regard to managing drought is using water efficiently, and that's certainly something that I think irrigators are good at but can get better at. Is part of your modeling and part of the work that you're doing acknowledging some of that and kind of pushing that to things like cover and growing a lot more with less water simply by preventing, you showed some pictures of what obviously happens when there's no cover on land. It just dries up, but there is opportunity to keep cover that really stretches the water use, which I think really is a significant part of our insurance against water efficiency. Is that part of your modeling and what you're working on, and where are we at in that? My contention would be that we're just scratching the surface in terms of real efficient use of water to grow crops and that kind of thing.
Well, I didn't sort of tip our hand yet on our recommendations, but I think I'll give a preview that is definitely one of the areas that the Alberta Water Council, from learnings from this exercise, wants to focus on, is that water efficiency piece, as well as structural infrastructure as well. And yeah, I think that we saw that there was still a lot of opportunity for water efficiency from this group, the irrigation, agriculture, and I'm from the city of Calgary, so our drought plan also is going to lean heavily into our demand and our demand reductions as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the question about in-stream flows. Last year was a high demand year, as we're all well aware, and the natural flows were actually below normal. But we have been making some pretty good inroads, like on the St. Mary River, the Waterton River. From about August all the way through September, we were well above minimums now. They are minimums, but we were probably 70 to 80% above right through. we're going away from days gone by where we have, we want to put our reservoir for our winter carryover and carrying an artificial peak at the end. We're spreading that wealth over a longer period of time. So we are getting better, and I find the meetings we have with the irrigation community, they're buying into this. If we can have an opportunity to put more water down the river, we are doing it, but there's room for improvement. I always get that. On the Old Man main stem, it's a given. There's a reconstructed natural flow every day, so we're mimicking the natural hydrographs. So we abide that. I don't think we've ever had a deficit on that, but it's on the tribs, they're fixed minimums. We're just making headway on that, is what I'm saying. And in a year like 2022, yeah, I think we passed like 18,000 cubic decameters and 16,000 cubic decameters respectively on Waterton and St. Mary's. So that's not bad, but there's always room to improvement is all I'm saying. Thanks.
Thank you.